Hello readers, I'm the Avid Reader and today I'm reviewing The Third Reich in Power, written by Richard Evans in 2005. This is the third book in the Third Reich trilogy and it covers the Third Reich, Nazi Germany from 1933 to 1939, the peaceful years of the Third Reich before they went to war. It's in 7 parts and it details quite well how German society is turned into a totalitarian state. Each part analyzes a different issue. It's a well-balanced book overall. So the first part is the police state, and he starts out discussing the Night of the Long Knives. So the Nazis have established unitary control in, let's say, July 1933. There's no real opposition apart from the army with President Hindenburg, but the SA remains very violent, and they are the more revolutionary wing of the Nazi party and they're controlled by Ernst Röhm. And Hindenburg threatens Hitler with martial law unless he takes care of this problem. So on the night of the 30th of June, you have a purge of mainly SA leaders. So SA is the paramilitary branch of the Nazi party and they like to fight. So Hitler takes the lead, rounds up a bunch of these SA leaders, and they are later on executed. He also takes the opportunity to eliminate some potential rivals. So for example, the General Kurt von Schleicher is gunned down with his wife. And a month after this, President Paul von Hindenburg dies. And the army was loyal to President Hindenburg, but Hitler gets the acquiescence of the generals to knight the position of Chancellor and President into the position of leader or Führer. So starting in 1934, Hitler has complete control of the state apparatus, which includes now the military. A lot of the political opposition, especially the Social Democrats and the Communists, those who did not go into exile are sent to prisons and then later on camps. So often what would happen is that you're sent to a prison and then when you're released you're taken into so-called protective custody and sent to a concentration camp. And the concentration camps were first mostly for political prisoners, and in the later years they were more focused on the criminal elements of society, so what the Nazis classified as degenerates in a sense. So petty criminals, prostitutes, homosexuals, and other minorities are persecuted. And you really understand the SS brutality when reading about these camps and how they are run. When you join the SS, you undergo severe brutal training, so you become a brutal person yourself, and the few SS men who could not handle the violence of the camps, well, they resigned. So towards the eve of the Second World War, you could basically classify the remaining SS guards as violent brutes. And of course, people don't really know what's happening in the camps, but they don't want to end up there, that's for sure. So within a year or so, pretty much all of the resistance of the left has been crushed. So the Social Democrats are in exile in Prague. The Communists, well, they've been arrested and others have left for the Soviet Union. And to bring an era of legitimacy, Hitler has a bunch of plebiscites, so rigged elections. So he has that, for example, for I believe when he wanted to join the title of president and chancellor together into leader. And in all of these elections, in each area, he got at least 85% of the vote. There was still a minority of people who they didn't vote for it, even though there was some threats and consequences if you did not vote yes. Because the SA exerted huge pressure. Sometimes they went from house to house to make you vote, so even if you were sick you had no excuse. The second part of the book covers the culture of Nazi Germany. The Nazi government issued these people's receivers, so now a bunch of Germans have radios, so they can regularly hear Nazi propaganda speeches. Goebbels understood that propaganda, you have to make it half true, half false. So don't just put in your ideas, mix them in with other stuff. And most of the programming wasn't that political. And the triumph of the will with the large marches in September 1934 at Nuremberg, while Goebbels was opposed to that. The Nazis had degenerate art and degenerate music exhibitions, which showed art often, for example, of Jews. There's a competition between Goebbels and Rosenberg in the culture area. So Rosenberg is pretty much in charge of education while Goebbels is in charge of propaganda, and Rosenberg is much more radical in culture than Goebbels is. But in the end, Goebbels, he's the one who controls the German culture. Newspapers were co-opted by the Nazis, but one of them, the Frankfurter Zeitung, managed to remain half independent for a long time until E.G. Farben took it over, and it was able to criticize the Nazis by being ironic or sarcastic sometimes. And In the end, music was not too much regulated. Goebbels understood that people needed a private sphere to go into and pretend that nothing had changed. So you could listen to the classics, pretend that you were not under a totalitarian regime. The first part covers religion and education. So if you want to know how Nazi Germany was much more totalitarian than Italy, well, it is because Germany suppressed the church. So 2/3 of Germans are Protestants, 1/3 are Catholics, and they are anti-Semitic, the Christian, but not in a racial sense, in a religious sense. So they don't want persecution of Christian Jews. There are competing factions among the evangelicals. So you have the Nazi German Christians who are in favor of this racial Christian identity. And then you've got the Confessing Church, which is opposed to all of this Nazi cult stuff. So the Confessing Church have kind of criticizes Nazi behavior, and of course the Nazis are persecuting the churches. So in the end they had totalitarian control over even the churches. The Catholic Church of course was loyal to the Vatican and not to Nazi Germany, so they were also persecuted. So pretty rapidly Hitler broke his Concordat agreement he had made with the Catholic, and Goebbels tried to defame the Catholics by alleging that there were a bunch of pedophiles among them, for example. And I believe the Catholics had a bunch of religious schools, but they begin to be closed down. The Nazis are taking control of education. So Nazism really despises the teaching profession. It's really anti-intellectual. And the Nazis organized the youth into the Hitler Youth Movement, and it's an organization for German kids where they are indoctrinated into the Nazi ideology and are physically fit. And these are long days. They initially liked this to go on camping trips, but all of the ideology and too much of this physical fitness thing kind of bores them in the end. So there's a lot of loss of enthusiasm for the Hitler Youth. But the Hitler Youth establishes control in the schools, and now teachers have to be afraid of what they say. And the universities actually managed to not be too much co-opted by the Nazis. However, there was a huge decline in students, and Nazis privileged the medical profession while they denigrated the others, such as the humanities and law. And they also established their own parallel weird universities things where you trained into that and you would maybe later, for example, join the SS. The fourth part covers the economy. Here is an interesting section of the book, you can say. Now, Richard Evans refuses to call the Nazis socialists, but pretty much everything that's described in this plan is socialist, in the sense that it's government control of the means of production, not necessarily ownership, but they control it, indirectly or directly. So first you have plans for establishing motorways everywhere in Germany. They also established the people's car, although most people don't get to drive one actually. There is a success in reducing unemployment heavily. However, the Nazis played a lot with statistics, so a lot of this was getting women out of the workforce, for example, and the living standards of workers decreased in a sense, so consumer spending power decreased. So although unemployment went down, prosperity didn't come from it actually. That's a myth. And the economy is being reorganized into a war economy. So first you have Hjalmar Schacht, who has some moderate policies, and he's pretty successful in reinvigorating the German economy for warlike purposes. But he's not willing to go fast enough, Schacht. So Göring replaces him with the four-year plan in 1936. And here the Nazis say, we don't care about your profits. We are prioritizing war. So workers in the arms industry are privileged compared to other types of workers, and other types of work suffer. Because the priority is not consumer goods, but war materials. And they are trying to institute autarky, but they cannot completely do that, so they have to trade a little bit with other countries, but they try to limit that to their eastern sphere. One of the way they pay for their things is that they Aryanize Jewish businesses. They seize the means of productions of Jews. They pay them less than their worth. Often they confiscate their goods. If you try to leave Germany, your money is seized usually. And there's big collaboration between the government and IG Farben, but it's a lot less than people actually think. The fifth part discusses the class system in the Reich. So they try to reform the farming situation by passing the Reich-entailed farms. This makes it basically that middle-level farms are not allowed to be sold, traded, and that they only go to the oldest son of the family when the father dies. So it screws up a lot of inheritance and farm system, and it's harder to buy property and farms now. So Nazis claim they are in favor of property rights, but no, that's a lie. There was not really a private market in Nazi Germany. It was co-opted under a kind of fascist system. Fascism and Nazism is socialism halfway, it's the third way. Government control, they don't nationalize everything, they nationalize something such as the Jewish businesses, but they direct the economy. And if the economy is called to prepare for war, that's not capitalism, that's socialism. It's war socialism, sure, but it's nonetheless socialism. The villages manage to keep their autonomy so people stay loyal to their villages, so Nazis don't really have any influence over them. With the nobles, the older nobles don't like the Nazis while the younger ones do. And the younger ones actually join the SS. The Nazis, of course, have their own union, the German Labor Front, and the German Labor Front makes things better for German workers sometimes. So they force concessions on the owners, but not too much. Now, that's another indicator that it's socialist. The unions are backed by the government. They are restricted in their actions in some ways, but they're backed by the government nonetheless, so businesses don't really have free reign, though sometimes they collaborate with the government. Sometimes it's the union and the government, sometimes it's the business and the government, but it's always the government. But the German Labor Front helps instituting the Strength Through Joy Act, which allows vacations for German workers sometimes, but they are also ideological indoctrination, but people don't really care about that. They go on these cruises to these hotels to relax. The professional jobs such as teaching, academia are denigrated, same thing with the civil service, but doctors are elevated and are granted more powers, how they can start thinking about eugenics. And that's the next part, which shows how the Nazis are instituting a racial hierarchy. So they start sterilizing mental defectives. They also have forced sterilization of half-blacks they have in Germany, which come from the Ruhr often, or from former German colonies. The Romanis are set up in these voluntary camps, although they are quite brutal. And of course the Jews have been kicked out of the civil service, but not too much happens to them, although they are persecuted regularly by the SA. But in September 1935 have the passing of the Nuremberg laws. This deprives citizenship from some racial groups, and it prohibits marriages between Jews and non-Jews and classifies what counts as a Jew. So basically, if 3/4 of your grandparents are Jewish, you're Jewish. Although in practice, these laws went much further. So if you were quarter Jew, yeah, you were also discriminated against. Jews were, of course, not allowed to join in the military. They had been purged. And the Nazis are trying to get the Jews to emigrate out of Germany. So they are going to other places in Europe, so over half the Jews leave, and a lot of them go to Palestine actually. But in November 1938, things get a lot worse for the Jews, because a German diplomat in Paris is killed by a Jew. So the Nazis take this as a chance. On the 9th to 10th of November, the Nazis take the chance to create a pogrom. The SA and a lot of youngsters go in and break up Jewish homes, Jewish shops, and beat up a lot of Jews. And 30,000 Jews are sent to concentration camps, although a lot of them are soon released to emigrate out of Germany. And from this point on, in November 1938, you are not supposed to associate with Jews. So now the Jews are isolated from the rest of German society. The younger ones are trying to get out, but a lot of Jews are old, so, well, they say they're German, we're not leaving. But Jews only made up 1% of Germany's population, and they are probably reduced to about 0.5%. During the 1936 Berlin Olympics, they tagged down on the anti-Semitism and on the repression. Eugenics and anti-Semitism existed in the rest of Europe. However, it was much more moderate, so that hurt the image of Nazi Germany. So during the Olympics, they had to tone down the anti-Semitism, although it still remained partially. And then it, of course, came back immediately after the Berlin Olympics. And after Kristallnacht, everything is bad for the Jews. They're screwed. They have to get out, or they're really going to get repressed heavily. And a lot of them are sent to concentration camps if they do not emigrate. The final section deals with foreign policy, and it's basically a road to war. So first, Germany remilitarizes. There's a referendum in the Saarland in January 1935, which allows them to decide whether they want to join Germany or not, and they decide to do so. In March 1936, Hitler sends in the military to the Rhineland, so it's remilitarized. They were taking a big risk in this because if France had wanted to, they could have crushed Germany because of this action. In 1936, Germany was still much weaker than France. But of course, because of appeasement, the French and the British did nothing. In 1934, the Austrian Nazis tried a coup in Vienna, which killed Austria's leader, but it failed. It was crushed by the Austrian military. So Hitler sends Franz von Papen, former vice-chancellor, down to Vienna as an ambassador. So Papen keeps cordial relations between Austria and Germany. Then the new chancellor in Austria, Schuschnigg, decides in March of 1938 to hold a referendum of whether Austria should be independent or join Germany. And of course, Schuschnigg is going to exert coercion so that Austria remains independent. But Hitler and Goering are having none of that. So they summon Schuschnigg, they give him an ultimatum, and they berate him, and basically they turn Austria into a province of Germany. So in mid-March 1938, the German army marches in. They hold, the next month, Austria holds a referendum on whether it should join Germany. And of course, with Nazi coercion, 98% or so of Austrians vote to join Germany, and they are turned into a province. So Austrian nationalism, all of that, that's crushed. Most of Austria's Jews emigrate out of there, and a lot of this foreign policy is now influenced by Ribbentrop, who hates Britain and thinks they're weak. So he puts the idea in Hitler that they can do whatever they want and the British won't act. So the Nazis have plans in September 1938 to annex Czechoslovakia by going to war. But through some engineering by different diplomats, there's a Munich conference, and they form the Munich Agreement, of course, which gives the Sudetenlands to the Germans without the consent of Czechoslovakia. The democracy in Czechoslovakia fails, and it is split up between Hungary, Poland, and Germany, and Czechia is fully annexed as Bohemia and Moravia into Germany in March 1939, while Slovakia is split up into the Slovak state, and then the southern part is given to Hungary. And of course the Hossbach Memorandum from September 1937, which A.J.P. Taylor rejects, well, that proves that Nazis had plans of wars of aggressions in the east at least. And Poland refuses to cede Danzig and the Polish corridor, so Germany plans to go to war. And during the Czechoslovakia crisis, some German generals thought of overthrowing Hitler, but since Hitler succeeded with his Munich Agreement, they didn't do that. So now the generals are more loyal to Hitler, and the generals, of course, and the conservatives favor a war in the east, and they hate the Slavs and communists. So August and September 1939, Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, and Nazi Germany goes to war with Poland. World War II begins, and that's the end of the Third Reich in Power. How would I rate The Third Reich in Power by Richard Evans? I'm gonna give it an 8 out of 10. This book is an improvement of The Coming of the Third Reich, and that's because in Coming of the Third Reich, Richard Evans really misunderstands economics and how it affected Germany. In this book, Richard Evans discusses the socialism in National Socialism, although he says that it isn't socialism, but that's fine, because this book tacitly understands economics mostly, while The Coming of the Third Reich didn't really do that. So it's a good book, it's an 8 out of 10. I definitely recommend this book if you want to learn about how the totalitarian system was established in Nazi Germany, and it also shows the Nazi brutality against everyone who wasn't Nazi. So if you were Christian, Catholic, Jewish, any other racial minority, social democrat, communist, worker, noble, professional, you were persecuted. The Nazis persecuted pretty much everyone. In the first years, they maybe killed only a few thousand, but nonetheless, this was a state of terror. And the Germans never really were successfully Nazified. Only anti-Semitism permeated all Germans pretty much. But the Nazi ideology overall only entered the mind of mostly the young. Even then they were sick of all this exercise of the Hitler Youth and trying to control the youth spirit. So the Nazis, they established a totalitarian state, but the subtitle, How the Nazis Won Over the Hearts and Minds of a Nation, they actually never really succeeded in doing that. And I really appreciate the analysis of Richard Evans of Nazi Germany during the 30s. It's good. It misunderstands economics to a certain extent, but not too much. It succeeds at showing the sophisticated evil that was Hitler and Nazi Germany. So this was the Avid Reader's review of The Third Reich in Power, written by Richard Evans in 2005. It got an 8 out of 10. I hope you readers enjoyed this book review, and I will see you readers next time.